welcome to part 4 of our Beginning Ruby series, where we try to cover various aspects of learning to program Ruby, the parts that trip up beginners. In this part, part 4 here, we have a guest on the line, Derek, who is one of the students in our program. In this session, what I wanted to do was ask him to work through a couple of exercises that I'm going to present to him. And in this way, you guys will be able to see how you can approach a problem, and when you run into a dead end or get stuck, how you can recover. Because a lot of times in our program, what we do is we cover the happy path, the path to the solution. And sometimes that's useful, and sometimes that's no more useful than just seeing the solution code. It's not quite the real experience of working through a problem. And Derek hasn't seen these exercises I'm about to present to him yet, so he's going to be surprised. It's going to be, I anticipate, a lot of him thinking on the spot. So we'll kind of lean back here and see his performance. And the idea is that as he works through these, I will try to give some feedback. And again, I anticipate that for the most part, we'll lean back a little bit and watch him code. And he's coding right now. So he's on the line. I'm going to try to speak to him. So when I speak, I'll probably be speaking to him for the most part in this session, and we'll try to have a conversation about it. And so he's typing right here on Cloud9's interface here. And so we'll be coding in a collaborative environment. Okay? And like I said earlier, if you guys have, if we have time permitting, if you have some sort of interesting exercises that you want to see Derek attempt, you can just drop that into the chat box or question box, and we'll see if we have time for the end. Okay, Derek, are you there, and are you ready? Do you want to give a quick introduction to everybody?
Sure. I'm Derek. I'm fairly new to Ruby. I've been studying for, I guess, about a year in total. I am in the first course here at law school, and looking forward to helping out today. Okay,
great. So we'll get right to it. I prepared several exercises. They're going to increase in difficulty. The first one is actually, I think, the easiest, although everyone attempts sort of perceives or takes these exercises a little differently. So the first exercise, I don't have anything written, so I'm just going to describe it for you, Derek. The exercise is to write a method that takes a string as an argument. And all this method should do is return the string in reverse order, except don't use the built-in reverse method in the string class. And that's it.
Okay. All right. So my first thought is I'm going to create a method here. We'll call it string reverser. And we'll take a string. And my first thought is I can take that string and I can use the split method on it to break it up into pieces.
And Derek, just FYI, this is open book. You can hop into IRB there at the bottom. So it's not like a test of your memorization. It is code as you normally would. So you can use pry, IRB, or even Ruby documentation.
Okay, so let's go ahead and say that I'm going to string.split here. And I want to save that. Call it reversed string equals string.split. That should return me an array. Then if I should be able to join. So once I have my array, I should be able to pop the elements of the string, from that array, pop them off and add them to a new empty array. Thus, getting my pieces in reverse order, and then I can join them back together. So let's see if we can do that here. Reverse string. I'm going to make myself a new array to catch the pieces of the string here. So let's go ahead and say that for I'm going to need to run that pop to pop off the pieces of the string one at a time. So I need to do that. The number of times I need to do that is the length of the string. So reversed string length times, and I'll take my new array. I'll use a shuttle operator to add on the elements that I'm popping off the end of that array. So first string pop. All right, so once I have everything in reverse order, will that return me my new array? All right, so let's return, we'll just explicitly return new array. Just to make sure I get that at the end here.
So Derek, I just want to make an observation here. I can see 2 errors here already. You haven't run the code yet. So as you type more lines of code, there's just more opportunities for errors.
Right. Okay, let's see.
But go ahead and run it and then see if you can debug it.
All right, let's see. Let's see if we can get one of this.
So what I always try to say is, before you run it, try to anticipate what you expect.
Mm-hmm.
So your string reverse method is returning something. So you got to print out the return value, right? If you don't, if it's printing out something, then you don't have to print it out. Right.
All right, so let's put that there so we can see what comes at the end of it. All right, so we're just popping off the last element there.
Mm-hmm. So you're on the right track. It's kind of reversed, but it's only returning the last letter.
All right. Okay, let's see. Let's go string that length at times. That's our original string there, so.
So the reason it's doing that is because you have a return on line 9. So the first time it's going through, it's as soon as it hits line 9, it's going to return, and that's not what you want, right?
Okay, let's see here.
Okay, good. So at the end there, I felt you're entering what I call hack and slash mode a little bit. In that hack and slash is a place you never want to go, especially in a job interview, is when you kind of are just typing code and kind of hoping it works. But this is right for the most part. One thing I didn't like with so the error that was bothering me, or that I saw earlier, was when you're iterating through reverse string and you were mutating and iterating through at the same time. Do you see how that could sort of mess up your iterator? So you don't want to mutate the theme.
Yeah.
that you're iterating through in the middle of the iteration. So the fact that you changed the string was good. Alternatively, you could have used, because you're just worried about the number of times that you're going to iterate through, right? It's not actually whether it's reversed or not reversed. You just want five iterations, right? So if you're going to use pop, which will actually decrease this reverse string array, and I probably wouldn't call it the string just because it's an array, it's going to modify the length, right? So that'll be an error. So the fact that you switch a string is good. The alternative solution here is you could have used reverse string and then just referenced the last element. So without using a destructive method, because you actually don't care that the reverse string is destructive, right? You don't care that it is modifying the reverse string array. All you care about is returning the last value.
Yes.
Right. Okay. I think the major feedback I have is this, and I see this with a lot of people, especially people who are, I would say, are used to relying on their natural processing power, write a lot of code without running it. And my advice is always to run the code as soon as possible. Don't write one line of code without running it. And sometimes, especially if you're kind of getting good at programming, or you feel like you're getting good at programming, you're getting more comfortable, developing more fluency, you start to abandon that habit. What I see is when people first start learning, they can't write one line of code without running it. They learn from experience that every line of code they write is very error prone. As you get better, you start to abandon that habit. But as you work on problems that are more and more difficult, you have to bring that habit back. You really have to run every single line of code as you move forward. I'm going to give you another exercise here and see your approach. And again, I mentioned this is because as you work on harder problems, it's going to become harder and harder to sort of think through and write out the entire program in one go. Like, you were able to do this for the most part, which is it's a really good sign that you were able to do that. But in the future, you may or may not be able to. And I would say probably the third exercise here, you probably for sure won't be able to. But we'll see.
Okay.
All right. So the second exercise I have here is called fizz buzz. Have you heard of fizz buzz before?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. This is like the hello world of interview questions. It's very, very basic and common. And so just go ahead and read through that description and let me know when you're done reading it.
Okay.
Okay, great. So just go ahead and implement it. We want to be able to execute the code on line 5. That's a method invocation. And then the output should look like line 8.
Okay. So first, let's create a method here. We'll call fizz buzz. Not sure what I want to put in there yet, so take a moment. The first thing I know I need to be able to do is I need to so I put an element in here. I know it needs to output my number. Oops, no. 17. Okay. Good enough for now. So
Now our method needs to take 2 numbers though.
yes. Go ahead and give us the beginning number and ending number. Let's go ahead and output that range. Let's go beginning number. Make sure we get what I'm expecting here. I'd like to be able to see all those numbers come out for me. Let's go ahead and 0 and 5. I'm going to go ahead and I think that flat operator will get me an array to print out. So let's go check that. All right, there's my my 0 through 5.
And you can call
Okay.
2A on it as well.
Right. Okay, so now to the hard part, I suppose, of getting the bit to print out fizz and buzz. So now I want if. I'm taking a moment to think about this. So let's take this array here. And for each element, we'll do to name it element works just fine for me. I know at the very end here, I want to so once again, let's see if this still gives you what I'm looking for. Output. Fixing a new line. So it's looking for another end.
You don't need a splat operator there. You can actually just iterate through a range with each.
Okay. Okay.
Or you can convert it to an array with 2A. There you go.
Okay. All right, so once I get rid of that flat operator, so let's go ahead and enter my if else statement. So I know my else would be just print the element. So we'll start with if element modulo 3 is equal to 0. So if there's no remainder when I divide by 3, I want to print the word fizz. All right. Close to where I want to be. I don't quite know that I want to include 0 in there, but I don't know if I want to fizz for 0, but I can account for that in just a moment. So if an element of modulo 3 is 0, puts fizz, else if element modulo 5 equals 0, puts fuzz for else back.
So, Derek,
Okay,
do me a favor
yeah.
and change the arguments to 1 and 15 so we can compare it to the output on line 8.
Oh, okay. Sure, no problem. Let's see how we're doing here. Not bad. But I think I want to check for this condition. I think I want to check for the fizzbuzz condition first. So let's make this an else if.
Right,
And
15 is supposed to be fizzbuzz.
Mm-hmm. If element modulo 3 is 0 and element modulo 5 0, I want to put fizzbuzz. Okay. Okay, let's see how this looks. All right.
Great. Now, can you get it into that format that we're looking for on line 8? The comma separated on one line?
Sure. Absolutely. So instead of just outputting directly,
Yeah, the method can still output.
right. I still want output, but I'm thinking what I would like to do is collect these elements in an array and then process that array so it looks the way I want and then print that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so let's create an empty array called fizzbuzz array. Really creative with my naming here. And let's use that shovel operator again. Array. Okay, fizzbuzz. So instead of outputting directly with each pass through my use iterator, we will add the elements to my array.
Got a typo there. Lines 17 and 19. And now also 20.
Oh, yeah, there we go. That would have been. Thank you.
And yeah.
Okay, so let's see where this gets me. Let's just put this away. Okay, so get that output. Just want to let's put fizzbuzz array dot join with Yeah, that does. Super.
Yep, perfect. So yeah, looks great. So as I was watching you do this, I almost wish that you violated or didn't do such a good job so that I can say something. So for the people who are watching, I this approach is really good. The approach that Derek took in terms of executing the code so many times. So the first thing you did, Derek, was you went in here and you outputted the range before doing anything, right? And you executed the
Mhm.
code. This particular problem, I want to say I've given this to over 50 people, and vast majority, like over 90% of people don't do that. They just start coding. And so I got a question here saying, should we write pseudocode first? I think pseudocode is helpful, yes. But the problem that I see most of the time, and part of me almost wish you did this, Derek, so that I can have some instructive criticism here. But you did such a great job that I don't have to do that. Is some will write the pseudocode and some will just kind of think really hard, and then they just write a lot of code, and almost like converting their pseudocode into actual programming code, but then they don't run the actual programming code to verify, right, that their logic is correct or their syntax is correct. Most of the time, when they type 4 lines of code or 2 lines of code, there's just tons of errors already in the editor. And when they go run the code, it's already a little bit too late in that you have 4 or 5 or maybe sometimes half a dozen errors. And then when you're trying to isolate those errors and fix those errors one at a time, that's just a really hard place to be. You start hacking and slashing a little bit. But Derek did such a great job that the approach seemed very natural, right? But the key thing to sort of identify here is how he printed out everything. And I think even when you, Derek, when you first out printed a range, and then you printed out, iterating through the range and print out each element. That was a critical step there that you almost skipped, because you print out the range and then you started writing the if statements, right? And then you deleted it and then you put out the element. And I thought taking that little tiny step of saying, let me just print out every single element inside the range before I take another step was really critical, because we caught that one error where you had the asterisk, where you had the splat operator, right?
Yes.
If you had not decided to take that seemingly trivial step of printing out every single element in the range, that splat operator bug would have been there. Now, each of these individual bugs that you have will likely be things that you can overcome. But when you have 4 or 5 of them, it just gets really frustrating to code that way. So, you see allowed to use the range method. Yeah, for this particular exercise, everything's on the table in terms of this is not a trick of what can you use or what can you not use. The first exercise was just, using reverse would be a little bit too easy. That's all. So here, it's not so much about allowing or not allowing certain methods, and more or less the systematic approach to solving it. And Derek did a great job. Like I said, part of me was also almost hoping that he would trip up a little bit, so I have something to criticize or, kind of provide some insight. But walking through this exercise in such a sort of tiny steps and executing it so often is the right way. When you write pseudocode, that's fine too, to sort of get your brain into thinking mode and starting to decompose the problem. But again, the most sort of biggest problem I see is that when people try to, people are either thinking really hard or they write pseudocode. Either one is fine. But when they start to write the actual code, people write a lot of code before running it. And usually people it's very hard to write 3 lines of code without an error. Right, and Derek's been at this for maybe, you said about a year, Derek, so maybe that's been a big help, right? And that's been a big help in terms of, you're able to write a lot of code without committing too many errors. But if you haven't been doing this for 12 months, the approach is going to matter more. And another reason why approach is more important than, and I see people trying to think about this problem all the time, just, present the problem, people just start thinking about it. No coding, just thinking. And that's really problematic, because if you rely on just your sort of natural thinking ability, and you're in an interview environment where you have two people in the room, part of your brain is going to be monitoring the environment. Your brain subconsciously is going to be monitoring the reaction of the people in the room. And so your natural sort of processing ability is going to be degraded. And I can't tell you how many times I've given this exercise and the exercise following that people have said, if I could just do this in my own office without anybody watching or asking me questions, I could just knock it out in a couple minutes. But in this environment, when someone's kind of, interrupting me or talking on the phone, I just freeze. And part of that is because your brain is monitoring the environment and your natural thinking ability is degraded. So relying on an approach is the thing that you're going to be able to lean on, as opposed to just thinking about it. And I find that it's almost like the smarter the person is, the more they rely on just thinking their way through it. And as you, not just in the context of a job interview or a foreign environment where your brain is monitoring other things in the environment, but as the problems get harder, you're going to have a less likelihood of just thinking your way through it. Thinking is definitely required, but the approach that Derek demonstrated here is absolutely critical as well. Yeah, I got some questions here, like edge cases. What's going to happen if it's 10 or -1 or 0 or 10 and D? We didn't do any integer validation here, so that's okay. I would say that that's not part of this particular exercise. If we wanted Derek to code those up, we can definitely add it as part of the input, and we can decide whatever we want the output to be. Right? We can say raise an error. We can say return -1. What happens matters less. What matters more is what do we want to happen, right? So for this particular exercise, it's just, it's the hard or the tricky part here isn't to figure out the validation of the integers, though that could be a sort of an add-on. But that wouldn't be too hard. Validating integers would be pretty easy to do. All right, ready for the next one, Derek? It's a little bit harder.
Yes.
Okay, let me pull it up real quick. I have it right here. I'm going to delete this exercise. So do you see the new exercise I pasted?
Yes.
Okay, so scroll to the top. This is a products array. It's an array of hashes. This array represents sort of like laptop machines. And each individual product is represented by a hash. There's a name and there's a price.
Okay.
Scroll down a little bit. We have two hashes on lines 19 and 25. The first hash is query, and this particular hash has a price min, price max, and a queue. And they are filtering criteria. Query 2 is also a hash. It's same keys as the query on line 19, and these two queries are basically filtering criteria. And scroll down a little bit. I want you to implement this search method that we're going to write. And if you look at lines 35 and 38, those are example invocations of this search method. So on line 35, we're going to execute this search method. We're going to pass in the query hash object from line 19, and it is going to return a subset of the products array. It's going to return an array with one product in it. This is the only product that fulfills the criteria of the query hash. Mm-hmm. And incidentally, that product is on line 3. The method invocation line 38 takes query 2 hash and returns a new array that contains 2 hashes. And again, these 2 hashes are the only 2 hashes that represent the criteria specified in query 2. In other words, they're the only dells that are between 300 and 450. So the goal here is to implement this search method.
Okay.
So go for it.
Excellent. All right. And by excellent, I mean this looks a little challenging. So the first thing I'm thinking is that I'd like to make use of the select method. I know that it will take an input, or it'll look at a collection of elements, and it will allow me to either keep or discard those elements based upon whether they meet certain criteria. I've never used it on an array of hashes before, so I guess I'll just have to look out for some pitfalls here. But all right, first things first. My query is an array. I'd like to take a moment to review the documentation for the select method for is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
All right, I do tend to keep those on hand when I'm solving a problem. So, all right. So what I'm going to have to keep in mind here is, looking at my documentation for select. I know that I could pass each element in. I'll give it a name similar to the each pair. I'll give it based on the requirements of the my output here. I'll be passing. I'll essentially be passing a hash each time. So in my head, I'm gonna have to go back and forth between hash syntax and array syntax. But let's go ahead and start by saying query.select. I suspect I'm going to need more than one line, so I'm not going to use the curly braces for this. I'm going to use a do end. Once again, because I'm boring, I'll go with element. I wasn't keeping in mind the fact that that query itself is going to be.
So one thing I'll point out, Derek, is that you're doing a lot of thinking ahead of time, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to do a lot of thinking. But remember what we talked about that you did such a good job on FizzBuzz, which is
running some code.
You took a lot of baby steps, and that really served you well. And here, you're not doing as much. You're doing a lot of thinking. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just that you've sort of abandoned that approach. From an instruction standpoint, it's great. I get to point out something, but like I'll just say the code on the table right now is wrong.
Right. All right. Let's take a step back. So I'm inputting a query that's a hash here. I need to select price minimum, price maximum, and element Q.
It's almost like sometimes thinking about what is the baby step to take, it is itself a chore. And so because you're trying to solve the problem in one go in your head. This is a much more difficult problem than FizzBuzz.
Right.
At the same time, you're trying to determine what steps to take. But instead of like trying to determine what step to take, what the advice I always give is just take a step that you know will work for sure. Like, print out hello. And then the next thing is like, okay, I'm going to print out query, or I'm going to print out products, or I'm going to print out the price, or something like that.
Okay, fair enough. I know I'm going to want to output an array. So let's let's call it output array. And I'm going to put output array. This doesn't really take into account at all my query yet, but yeah, let's start with small.
You might want to just use P there, which we'll call inspect.
Okay. There we go. All right. So I know that I'm at least outputting my array. So of course the hard part is what exactly to put in that array. Well, I know I want to take a look at my so I'm going to be referencing products. I suppose I started off running my select method on the query, which wasn't quite the right direction to go in. I want to run that select method on my products constant here.
So don't stop where you're doing, right? Just keep taking little baby steps. You know, like you're already kind of thinking ahead a little bit, which is good, which is fine. If you're able to do it, that's good. But again, you know, if you're able to do it for this problem, that's fine. But then, you know, you're going to face problems where you won't be able to do that too. So the next natural step is to just, you know, keep like taking tiny steps.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Something like that. Just print out the products, right?
Just go ahead and output the products and then output my array afterwards.
And maybe
So
use P there, just so you have a
P as well, right? Okay, so this is also an array. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes people say this is trivial. This is like too simplistic. But as you work on harder problems, and like I said, as you're in sort of a challenging environment, for example, in a job interview, in an office with 3 people who are silently looking at you, your brain, your CPU in your brain is going to be degraded because your brain is going to be monitoring environment, monitoring people, and so you just have to rely on, you know, your approach, your systematic approach.
Right. Okay, so again, I believe my my select method is the right way to go to narrow down the outputs here. So I'm going to go ahead and put products.select. And again, we'll start with baby steps here. Just take an element and let's say if that element name is Dell Inspiron.
So before you run it, try to anticipate what you expect the output to be.
So at the end of the day, when I run the select method, if my expression returns true, the select method is going to take the element and return that as part of an array. And if this expression returns false, it's going to discard the element. So I'm passing in each hash here as an element into my select. I should get the elements for which name is Dell Inspiron. I should get the entire hash here. I should get name Dell Inspiron, price $450.
So you're expecting what?
So I'm expecting an array with 2 hash elements in it here, or at least Yeah, I'm expecting to get an array that has 2 hash elements here.
Okay.
Let's omit this for the time being. Okay.
Yeah, perfect. And maybe
Well,
maybe comment out line 40 so we have one method invocation just to have less
right. Okay. Yeah.
clutter on the
Do it
output.
twice.
Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is a really great approach. Again, I really like this systematic approach because what I see in Derek, you're really fluent in your Ruby code. If you're
Mm-hmm.
earlier in the process, for those of you in the audience, if you're early in your process, what I see all the time is people sort of forgetting that this hash. Well, first of all, forgetting that products is an array of hashes than just saying element equals del Inspiron, for example. You'll immediately see that error when you run this code, as opposed to typing a bunch of code at once. The second thing is, once you recognize that each element is a hash, a lot of people forget that this is a symbol, and they'll just say name instead of name symbol, right, or the symbol name. And so all those little sort of simple typo errors are going to come out if you take the systematic approach. And rarely, and most of these errors I see are, it's not a lack of knowledge. Like people know that, okay, well, yeah, if you tell them, yeah, that's a symbol. It's like, oh yeah, that's right, it is a symbol, so I got to change that. It's really just a lack of fluency. But when you have, again, 4 or 5 of those in your code, it just becomes a bear to debug. So taking this sort of one little tiny step at a time, as Derek has shown here, is a really, really good way to mitigate against that problem of having 2 or 3 errors in the code. It becomes really difficult to isolate. Sorry, go ahead, continue, Derek.
Okay. So at this point, I'm ready to move away from my my standard my standardized element here. I hate to use the word element again, but and begin to consider what's coming in from the query. So I have a price element here for each item, and of course, what I'm thinking is if my price minimum falls in between price min and price max, then I want to keep that element. So I think the best way to take a look at that is to say element price of course, which side of my equation, if you will, do I want my price on? I think what I'd like to do is take, once again, create a range. Let's do it in pseudocode, if you will. Let's take, say, I'll have a range here called price min, price max, inclusive. If I say include, if it includes my price, that will return a true. If it does include my price, that will return true. That should keep the element that I've iterated across. So just a matter, I believe, of getting the syntax here correct. So
do you want to try an IRB just to verify with some dummy data, or are you pretty confident?
Yeah, you know what? Never too. Going into IRB, I suppose, is never a bad idea. So let's go ahead and say, yeah, let's go ahead and pass in the information from my query to here. Let's say 300, 450, include So I forget my question mark there. That include, what was the price I was looking for? Yeah, let's just pick one. 350. What do I get? True. Okay. So as long as I get that true value, I get to keep the element in my that I passed into my my select. So from here, let's go ahead and say, once again, query 2 is a hash. Query is a hash. So so query price min and let's not forget that this is a symbol. Sorry. Price max. I definitely prefer working with arrays to working with hashes in general. So I know that's something that I need to work on. Just fluency with hashes, but instead of using the curly braces, we'll use a do end. I believe I want this in parentheses. Yeah. I think what I'd like to do is, let's run this. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, I think running the code here is absolutely critical, just because there's so much room for error here.
Yeah,
I don't see any, but if you miss a parentheses or something like that. Now, what you might want to do is you want to save the result of this select, and then print out that array. But this is fine too.
Right. Okay. Well, in this case, let's say that output array equals. We'll put the output array. Let's see if that does a little better for me.
Right.
Okay. So all right. So that's the first query there, right? Let's see if my code works for the second one here as well. Looks like I got a few more than I was expecting.
Right.
The second time. So let's see what happened here. Okay, I'm not taking into account. I've only taken into account the price, and I haven't taken into account the, I guess, the name.
Right.
Here. So I want to make sure. So essentially, I'd like to create to treat this as one half of an expression, and say if that's true and some other condition is true.
Right.
So I suppose the Q is telling me that the string ThinkPad, my first query, the string or the string represented by Q needs to be included in the name element here. So I think I can just go ahead and once again use my include method to say if query Q, take a step back. If something includes query queue. All right. And that something, of course, is element is the name item for my element. I think that is what I'm looking for here. Let's see where that gets me. Let's put no. I'll look at Postgres.
So let me just point
Okay,
out
now,
that I'm so glad that you took it piece by piece, because now you know the error is introduced by line 37. If you had taken a shot at writing line 36 and 37 in one go, okay, now you're kind of hunting and pecking for the exact error. It could be anything at this point, right? But because you've been running your code so often, you know that line 37 is the culprit, likely, right? So at least it gives you a narrowed place to look for the error.
So this is where, under normal circumstances, I would use pry.
Right.
I'm not.
I'll give you a hint. You're paying for the fact that, remember how when we're doing the price range, I asked you to check it out in IRB and you did. You're paying for the price of not checking it out in IRB.
Yeah, knowing exactly what my output is going to be.
Yeah, what is the include for the string?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Like, what is the behavior of the include method for string?
Take a look. Once again, I suspect that it has to do with the fact that that this element contains capital letters. I think it's comparing very specifically. It's looking very specifically for lowercase letters.
That's a good instinct.
My guess.
I really wish you would verify that instinct in IRB.
Okay, let's take a look. Then. So let's go ahead and just say del inspiron include inspiron. Let's hope I'm spelling that right.
Right.
And of course, it's telling me no. So if I take that same expression and add down case, so I get true. Okay, so it looks like I can go into my original code here, and so I guess I'm going to do it after the parentheses here. Dot down case dot include. And I think that gets me to where I want it to be. Let's take a look.
All right, perfect. Nice job. We're out of time. If you guys have any questions, definitely post it. I'm getting some kudos for you, Derek. So people are saying this is really tough, and you're doing a great job, and how it's very interesting to see your thought process. So I will have to say also, I'll confirm that, Derek, that you did a great job. Most people, I will say, that I give this problem to, again, I've done dozens of these. Dozens of people have gone through these exercises. You're definitely in the top 10% of what I'm seeing. So you're seeing, for everyone else, you're seeing a pretty successful outcome here. Most people do not go through it this smoothly, right? There's a lot of hiccups. And most of the time, it's because people are not systematic. One thing, Derek, that I felt that you didn't do as thoroughly, but you got away with it, was checking the boundaries of the include method on a range. So one of the tricky parts was, for example, on query 2, we're looking at the minimum price of 300 and 450, and these two dells, they're priced right on the boundary of that criteria. So the question is, when I use include on a range, is that inclusive, right? Or is it not inclusive? And it is inclusive, so you were able to get away with it without sort of testing that. Suppose it's not inclusive, you would have, I guess you would have seen the error, right? And you would have probably fixed it. But as you play
Yeah.
around with these methods in IRB, it's sort of important to sort of explore the boundaries of the method, right? Not only that it works for the general case, but also where does it stop working? Overall, your approach is really good. I would almost say the the best approach I've seen, and you did this for the most part, Derek, but I would say it's something like this, where first you just print out something in a method. Two is, or you can say return either way. Print out the products, right? So the search method is always going to return a subset of the products, and you immediately jump to select, which is a good instinct. However, it's not necessary. If you didn't realize that, it's perfectly okay to use an iterator and just use this output array, right? So the actual code, you can actually get rid of this. You can get rid of the output array. You can get rid of it. Initially, you had the instinct of using the output array because you were doing some iteration. Once you settle on select being the last expression, right? This is the last expression in this method. It's the return of the select is the implicit return of the method. So in that way, this will work too. So the actual code here is, my comments here are causing error. The actual solution is like 2 lines of code, right? Not very exciting. If you just saw this code in the wild, you might say, yeah, that's pretty simple, or that's not too exciting. But seeing the process that this was built, I hope was interesting, right? So I'll finish up sort of the general path that I think is probably the easiest. Thinking a lot in the beginning is important. I'm not trying to diminish the value of thinking, but if you pave a path of very tiny steps, it'll actually kind of drive more concrete steps. And then, if you think about it in terms of tiny steps, it's much easier. And it's okay if you kind of go forward into a dead end, just back out, right? Let's say you're using a completely different way of working it, and you realize you hit a dead end, just slowly back out and try to go forward in a different direction. So print out the products array, then print out each element in products, right? So again, not too much thinking here in terms of how to do these things. It's just you take a tiny step. Once you can print out each element, then print out elements that are less than, let's say, $350 in price, right? And then you can start to incorporate the query criteria, right? And you can start there just by using the maximum price, right? So you kind of did this, Derek, but you actually, again, I think you have you've been at this for a while, so you were able to jump straight to the select, and also you were able to jump straight to the range here and use an include there. Now, for those of you sort of watching, if you were not able to make that jump, that's completely okay. But if you just take a very systematic approach, right, just hard code some value, right? So iterate through products. Can you iterate through an array, right? Can you iterate through an array? And the answer should be yes, right, at this point. And then the next step is, can you iterate through an array and print out the elements less than 350? And that might be a harder thing to deal with because now you're dealing with processing a hash, right? But if you contain it to just that, you may be able to deal with it. And then if you can do that, then the next step is to now, instead of hard coding value 350, let's just work with the query's price max key, right? And then you add in the other right? You add in one more query criteria, and then step 7 is add in one more. There's only 3, right? But if there were more, let's say there's more keys like location, right? And the query specify location, you just kind of keep adding one criteria at a time. And that's how you're systematically able to sort of break apart this problem. Let me look at, I got some questions here. Oh, so Derek, any other feedback or thoughts on this particular exercise?
Yeah, I know that for me, building the level of fluency where methods like include or downcase come to mind immediately. It definitely took some time, so I'm fortunate to have that to be able to fall upon. But I do feel like those are some of the real benefits of Ruby specifically. I have a very, very limited knowledge of, say, Java
Right.
from a few years ago.
Right.
And
I'm less worried about that because I think what I see is not so much people not knowing a solution. It's people can't even diagnose the problem. So if they know that this is capital and this is lowercase and that's the problem, usually people can sort of, Google or figure out some maybe roundabout way, maybe if it's not downcase in some roundabout way of solving the problem. What I'm seeing is that people can't diagnose the problem. They get to a point where either they freeze because the problem in front of them is too large, right? There's no tiny, people don't think about taking tiny steps. People try to think their way through solving the entire problem end to end from the start, and it's sort of paralyzing. The second thing is when you have 4 or 5 or 6 errors in the code, you can't even get to a place where you're running the code cleanly, right?
yeah,
And that's really, really debilitating, and especially if somebody is watching you, it just sort of feels like, oh my goodness, I'm making a fool of myself. I'd take a step back, blow all the code away. But what I notice is when people do that, they blow all the code away, they kind of repeat the process again, right? Let me just think, right? That's usually the answer that people get. Let me just think. Let me just give me some time to think. And we're sitting here 5 minutes in silence. And then, oh no, I can't do it, right? So if your fluency is not there, or if you're in an unfamiliar environment, or if the problem in front of you is very difficult, always doing something like this at least will allow you to come up with an approach. A lot of times when you go to job interviews as well, they'll give you a problem that is very, very difficult that they don't expect you to solve in 10 minutes. It's a very difficult problem. Maybe you can solve it in 20 minutes on your if you're in your office. But what they're looking for is, do you have an approach, or do you just stare at it? Right? Or what? How do you break it down? Right? Pseudocode, little baby steps. These are all sort of low-hanging fruit that you can employ to at least start to explore the problem. Otherwise, the first step is the hardest sometimes. Right?
right.
Yeah, great job, Derek. Any other questions for those of you on the call? Any other thoughts? I think this is it. We're already over time. So hopefully this was fun. A little bit different format. All right. I think that's it. All right, guys. Thanks, everyone. Bye, Derek. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.